First Men. The First Men are the original human inhabitants of Westeros. They ruled the continent for thousands of years before the Unduls invaded from the eastern continent of Essos. The Unduls overran most of southern Westeros, but failed to take the north. While the blood of the First Men and the Unduls has heavily intermingled over the centuries, through marriage or otherwise, the inhabitants of the north have the greatest amount of First Men blood in their veins and still maintain many of their traditions. History. Arrival in Westeros, the Pact, and the Age of Heroes. The First Men invaded Westeros some 12,000 years before the events of the series, crossing via a land bridge that connected Essos to the vicinity of modern-day Dorne. They were resisted by the Children of the Forest, a magical, diminutive race who ruled Westeros along with the giants. The Children, using magic, destroyed the land bridge, forming the modern peninsula of Dorne and the shattered islands known as the Stepstones beyond, but were pushed back over the course of many years of warfare. Eventually, the First Men and the Children forged the pact, signed on the Isle of Faces at the center of the vast lake known as God's Eye. The First Men began to forge numerous kingdoms across the continent. The two races subsequently coexisted peacefully for millennia, and during this time the First Men converted to the religion of the Children, worshipping the old gods of the forest. The old gods are nameless and uncountable spirits of nature, and their worship centers around sacred heart trees, weirwood trees which have had faces carved into their bark by the Children of the Forest. The fortresses and strongholds of the First Men in Westeros soon began to feature God's woods, sacred garden groves of weirwoods centered around heart trees. About 8,000 years ago, both races came under attack from the White Walkers, a mysterious race of ice and cold from the uttermost north. In the War for the Dawn, the First Men and the Children unified to throw back the invasion. With the aid of giants and the Children, Bran the Builder built the wall and would then build Winterfell and rule as the first king in the north. The First Men subsequently founded the Night's Watch to guard the wall should the White Walkers ever return. After this war the Children began dwindling in numbers, with the last of them disappearing around the time that the Unduls invaded Westeros, 2 millennia after the War for the Dawn according to tradition. The Undul invasion of Westeros. 6,000 years ago, the Unduls sailed across the narrow sea and began a massive migration to Westeros. First landing in the Vale, the Unduls spread across the continent in waves for the next 1,000 or so years, until they had overrun and conquered almost all of the continent. Their attempts to conquer the north, however, were defeated at every turn, in part because the narrow lands of the Neck which separate the north from the rest of the continent are an ideal strategic choke point, defended by the ancient castle of Moat Cailin. After many centuries the Unduls and First Men made peace, as individual Undul kingdoms carved out of southern Westeros became more concerned with fighting each other than uniting to crush the remaining independent First Men of the north. The results of the Undul invasion varied from region to region. In the Vale of Arryn, the First Men were all but wiped out, and today the nobility of the Vale are considered to have the purest Undul bloodlines in all of Westeros. In many other regions, the Unduls established themselves as the new aristocratic class ruling over the First Men, though after thousands of years these ethnic lines have blurred to a large extent. Some of the noble houses of the First Men survived by intermarrying with Undul invaders, even House Lannister possesses some First Men blood, through the female line. The Unduls that invaded the Westerlands married the female descendants of Lon the Clever, a legendary hero of the First Men, and House Lannister descends from this union. In the Riverlands, House Blackwood and House Bracken are also dynasties of First Men that survived by intermarrying with the Undul invaders, and today are of mixed ethnicity. The descendants of the First Men. Many people living in Westeros have at least some blood of the First Men in their ethnic makeup, though this is more common in the lower classes. Even so, the southern kingdoms of Westeros became so thoroughly dominated by the Unduls and their culture, that Westeros is often referred to as the land of the Unduls, in Essos. Two groups in Westeros, however, still claim majority descent from the First Men, and still actively embrace the old ways and religion of their ancestors, the Northmen and the Wildlings. The Crannogmen of the Neck are themselves a unique offshoot of the Northerners, while the hill tribes of the Vale are an isolate of First Men ancestry. Ties of dynastic marriage were made between the North and the Southern kingdoms over the next 6,000 years, so that the blood of both peoples mingled together, a process that has continued under the rule of the Targaryen kings. For example, Ned Stark, of the ruling dynasty of the First Men of the North, married Catelyn Tully, of the predominantly Undul ruling dynasty of the Riverlands, resulting in all of their children having mixed blood. Still, while the kingdoms south of the Neck consist of heavily mixed Undul and First Men ethnicity, the North is still predominantly First Men. The wildlings that live north of the wall are descended from those first men who were living north of the wall when it was constructed, and have an even purer bloodline than the north. There is little, if any, Undul blood north of the wall. Even in the Stark-held north, the usage of the language of the first men, the Old Tongue, was eventually discontinued in favor of adopting the language of their Undul neighbors to the south. However, the language of the first men is still actively used north of the wall, notably by the Thens, though a large number of wildlings are also fluent in the common tongue of the Unduls. In the books. In the A Song of Ice and Fire novels, the first men living in the north were able to resist the Undul invasion due to the geographical choke point of the neck which separates the north from the rest of the continent. The powerful fortress of Moat Cailin commands the approach to the north through the swamps of the neck. The only major road that large armies can use to travel north through the neck is so well defended by Moat Cailin that the kings of winter were able to consistently repulse Undul attempts to invade their lands. To be clear, the first men are not the first humans who lived in the entire world. Humans were already living on the eastern continent of Essos for untold millennia, and probably also on Sithorios, the Africa-like continent south of Essos. The exact origins of the human race are not known, because just as in real life, written history does not extend that far back. Even oral history eventually fades into varying fables, legends, and religious explanations for the origins of humans. The first men are simply the first humans that migrated to the western continent of Westeros. Author George R.R. Martin has stated that the series was loosely inspired by the War of the Roses which occurred in Britain during the 15th century. The first men loosely parallel the original Celtic inhabitants of Britain, while the Unduls who later invaded and conquered Westeros are loosely parallel to the Anglo-Saxon invasions of Britain during the 5th and 6th centuries. The Anglo-Saxons never conquered the Celtic peoples living in the region that would become modern Scotland, in the north of the island of Britain, who remained ethnically and culturally distinct. Similarly, the Stark-held north resisted the invasion of the Unduls from the south, and like Scotland remained ethnically and culturally distinct. Both Scotland and the north benefited from being separated from the rest of the island by a narrow isthmus. Wales also wasn't immediately conquered by the Anglo-Saxons, but in its case this was due to mountainous terrain. In Westeros, Dorne is a closer analogue to real-life Wales than the north is, though crossed with medieval Spain. The Anglo-Saxons did intermingle on some level with the Celtic/Romano-British inhabitants of what would become modern England, but they were subjugated and largely subsumed by the Anglo-Saxons. Similarly, people in the southern kingdoms of Westeros have some partial descent from the first men, in regions where the Unduls conquered and intermingled with the first men instead of wiping them out entirely. If you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you later, bye bye.